All right, go ahead.
Hey, this is Chris Wark, and you're on Your Superior Self.
Chris beats cancer. Chris, thank you for taking the time to come on the show, my man.
Thanks for having me.
I mean, that's a bold title. I mean, Chris beat cancer. I mean, that is, it's impressive. I mean, like I was telling you before, I had to peel this book out of my wife's hands because she was fascinated with it. I think it's very important that this information gets out to people. But before we get into it, though, why don't you give some folks here some background on your journey?
I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer when I was 26, and that was December 2003. So I'm coming up on 18 years. And, a cancer diagnosis is terrible news at any age. It's especially shocking when you're young. And I was a very, I'd say, typical cancer patient. I had really no clue about cancer, about the disease, about treatments. I'd never seen anyone really go through cancer treatment. I'd never had any close friends or family members go through it. I didn't have like many people now, we've seen so many people go through cancer that we can observe, like what cancer treatment is doing to their body and the destructive nature of it. But I didn't have that frame of reference. I just, knew chemo was toxic and your hair falls out and it makes you really sick. And I'd seen advanced cancer patients out in the world at the mall or at church or in a restaurant. And it's hard to forget, the first time you see a person, I think most people can remember the first time they saw a cancer patient, maybe when you were a kid and you had to ask your mom or dad, like, what's wrong with that person? Right? Because, they were in such a, alarming physical state. When you see another human in that state, it's, you just don't know what to think, right? It's like, so that's the only frame of reference I had to cancer patients and cancer treatment. And, but I was having abdominal pain and I went in for a colonoscopy and they found a golf ball sized tumor in my large intestine and did a biopsy. And then they said, a couple days later, they called me and said, you have colon cancer. And we need to get you into surgery right away and get this thing out of you before it spreads and kills you. So I was like, okay, whatever you say, I don't know. I don't know what else to do. Mm-hmm. And this was just a couple days before Christmas. And the way the cancer industry works, and I spend a number of chapters in my book explaining the pharmaceutical, medical, and cancer industries and how they work and how really it's a for-profit system that generates billions of dollars. And it really doesn't matter if patients get well. They make money regardless, right? Moliere said it in 1774. I believe medicine is the best of all trades because whether you do any good or not, you still get your money. And that is, 300 years later, it's the same. Nothing has changed. It's just a lot worse. And so I was, again, they wanted to get me into surgery like within a couple days, before I had time to think about my life or my health or cancer. I don't have time to do anything. And that's very typical. Cancer patients are rushed into treatment out of fear before they have time to understand their disease and really think about their life and why they're sick and what they could maybe do to help themselves. And they're led to believe that there's nothing they can do to help themselves. I mean, the first question that a cancer patient asks, why did I get cancer? What caused my cancer? How did this happen to me? And the answer they usually get is, well, we don't know, but it may be genetic or it may just be bad luck. And when a doctor tells you that, what they're doing is they are basically making you into a powerless victim of disease. There's nothing you did to contribute to your condition. Therefore, there's nothing you can do to help yourself except for show up for treatment. We are your only hope. And you just make sure you show up for your treatments, and we'll do the best we can, and we'll make you real comfortable, and we'll bring you cupcakes and donuts and Diet Coke, and our chairs are the most comfortable chairs in town for your chemo treatments.
It better be for that money you pay.
for that money. So this is the way they kind of sort of pander to cancer patients. And they make them powerless, right? They make them into these powerless victims of disease. And so I had surgery. I was able to postpone it because I didn't want to be in the hospital over Christmas because that was super depressing. So I went in on December 30th. They took out the tumor. They took out a third of my large intestines. Then when I woke up, they said, it's worse than we thought. You're stage 3C. We were hoping you'd be stage 2 because stage 2 means you have surgery and you go home. Stage 3 means you have surgery and then you got to do chemo. So for me, that was 9 to 12 months of chemo. That was my next step. So a couple things happened in the hospital, and feel free to interrupt me, by the way, if you have any questions or if anything I say doesn't make sense.
I will.
But two things happened in the hospital that are worth sharing. And one of them is the very first meal that I was served after having a third of my large intestine removed. Now, your wife may know the answer to this question. You might not have gotten that far into the book yet. Was a sloppy Joe. Right? And the sloppy Joe is a weird, it's kind of it's its own special category of food items because restaurants don't serve sloppy Joes because nobody likes them. And as far as I knew, the only place you could get a sloppy Joe was like summer camp or the military.
I think school might have done that. I don't know. School, sloppy Joes in school?
School lunches. Maybe. Yeah, in some places. Definitely in prison. If you're incarcerated, sloppy Joes are on the menu. So, I mean, I'm looking at this thing going, gross, right? I don't want to eat this. Like, this is horrible. And I like junk food. I was a junk food connoisseur. So anyway, that was a little strange that they were serving that to sick people and cancer patients. Especially ironic since red meat is a known carcinogen and processed meat is also a group 1A known carcinogen. So that was the first red flag. And the second red flag was a few days later when they told me I could go home. My surgeon came in to check on me one last time, and we were having a conversation about what was next. And I said, is there any food I need to avoid? Because I was wanting to make sure I didn't eat the wrong thing. If there was a wrong thing, right? After you cut your guts, a section of your guts out and sew them back together, right? Everything you eat is going through that tube. And he said, no, just don't lift anything heavier than a beer. So that was it. That was the nutritional advice I got from my surgeon. And I went home, and I'm thinking like, why is there such a disconnect between health care and health, healthy living, healthy eating, right? Nutrition. Like I knew that that world existed. I'd worked at a Wild Oats when I was in college, which got bought out by Whole Foods. So I'd worked at a natural grocery store for like a year. And so I knew what juicing was and wheatgrass was and organic food, organic produce. I knew what that was. I knew there was a world of super healthy stuff out there that I wasn't eating because I was too busy and I was young and I didn't have any health problems and I'm thin and I could basically eat whatever I wanted. I could not put on body fat. It's like not possible for me because I have a high metabolism. So anyway, I got home and I'm recovering from surgery. And as I sobered up, I weaned myself off the pain medication pretty quickly because I didn't like it. And I started thinking about my life and my future and like what was to become of me. And I saw myself as a cancer patient, as a chemo patient. And that was a scary, that was a scary thought, scary image, visualization of me becoming what I had seen other people become in the world. And I just didn't want to do it. Right. I didn't want to do that. And I don't think any cancer patient wants to do that. And most of them are coerced into doing it. They're told this is the only thing, this is your only option, chemo or die. And unfortunately, most of them do chemo and die. And probably the most alarming statistic that most people don't know is that since the advent of chemotherapy, 60 years ago, when it really started getting rolled out, we have only reduced the death rate of cancer by 5%.
Wow.
The overall death rate up by 5%. 5% improvement, billions and billions of dollars spent on research, billions and billions of dollars, really probably $1 trillion or more made in profit, and a 5% reduction in death.
Wow.
So that's a catastrophic failure. The war on cancer, declared by Nixon in 1971, failed. It was a failure, except billions, hundreds of billions, maybe trillion or more dollars in profit was made. So, the most lucrative failure ever, right? You're failing successfully. So, and what's the point in changing, right? You're making all this money. It doesn't matter if you actually win the war. You're making the money fighting the war. And so,
Well, it makes me
that's,
believe. It makes me think, like, is there even a war, right? Like, is it a war? Or is it just kind of like, allowing it to proceed, right? Because obviously, just like, let's face it, most of the world is ruled by five companies, and a lot of them are pharmaceuticals and energy companies, right? And I think if if we cured cancer, I mean, you talk about it in your book, right? I mean, all the money where it goes. If you follow the money, you'll find a lot of the root of the problem. But I don't see them curing it, right? Well, one, because there's, like you said in the book, there's so many different strands of it, or different types of cancer out there, that one cure wouldn't do it all anyway.
yeah, there's
Um,
hundreds of types of cancer. There's never going to be a cure. And you've got this huge industry. There's a lot of money funneled into it, but the pharmaceutical industry is the most powerful. It's more powerful than the energy industry. There's more lobbyists and more money spent lobbying by drug companies than any other industry in the United States. There's more lobbyists than there are Congress people. So and representatives. Like, it's ridiculous.
but where do you find your research at? Like, that's the biggest, like, so I'm just learning now. Like, I'm a psychology student in college, and I'm learning where to pull my research from, right? But a lot of people, the average person, doesn't have that knowledge. And for you, having, being diagnosed at 26 with cancer, where did you know where to go? Like, how did you learn to go to these different resources?
Yeah, I didn't know where to go. I had no idea where to go. I didn't know what to do. I don't know anything. Like, all the things I'm telling you now, I didn't know any of that.
Mm.
And so I'm interspersing what I've learned in 18 years, right, with into my story, which at that point of my life I knew nothing. But so I'm at home and I'm recovering, and I got this increasing internal resistance to chemotherapy. I didn't want to do it, and so I prayed about it, and I just said, God, if there's another way besides chemotherapy, please show me. Right, just a simple prayer asking for help. 2 days later, I got a book that showed up on my doorstep that was mailed to me from a man in Alaska who knew my dad. And this guy sent me a book written by a man named George Malcolmus. And the guy who wrote this book had colon cancer, and he healed it with a raw food diet and juicing. And I start reading his story, and it just blew my mind. It gave me so much hope and encouragement, and I knew it was an answer to prayer. And I was on the couch reading this book. I was a couple chapters in, just crying, like tears coming down my face. I was so overcome with emotion and so thankful that this person had taken the time, A, to send me a book, and B, that the person who wrote the book had written it. And so he made the case that the reason that so many of us are sick, which I'd never heard anyone say before, was because of our diet, the food that we're eating, the lifestyle that we lead in a modern society and industrialized nations is making us sick. And once I learned that, I realized, oh, well, the way I'm living is killing me. Okay, if this is true, then I should probably change what I'm doing. I should probably change my diet. And I changed it overnight.
Mm.
Literally overnight. Next day, I went to the grocery store. I loaded up the cart with fruits and vegetables. I bought a juicer, and I'm like, well, I'm going to do what this guy did. I'm going to overdose on fruits and vegetables. I'm going to eat a raw food diet. I wonder what would happen if I ate only raw fruits and vegetables. This is kind of a wild idea, and I like it.
Mm.
Right? I'm really interested to find out. And it makes sense to me. I don't feel like I'm risking anything doing this, right? I think this could only help, right?
Yeah.
This is the way I'm thinking about it. And so I overnight converted to a raw food diet and was on my way. That was the first step. And then I started reading and researching. And like, when you read one book, that book will reference other books. So then I would, look up other doctors and researchers and survivors. And so I started to discover other sources of information. And then as it turns out, this is another miracle in my life. My mom had a huge library of books on natural health and healing and alternative cancer therapies, like stacks and stacks of books on natural health that she had acquired over decades.
Hmm.
She was just a voracious reader and loved reading about healthy stuff and had just stacks of books. And I have a lot of them behind me. And so, every time I'd go to her and say, have you heard of this doctor? Have you heard of this person? And she's like, oh yeah, I have their book. I'm like, this is insane.
Hmm.
So, because the internet back then was not helpful. There was no YouTube, no Facebook, no Twitter, no social media, right? I mean, I don't even know if MySpace existed in 2004, maybe.
Hmm.
I guess it probably did. But I didn't get any information online. So I don't even know what we did on the internet because there was no video really. Like, before YouTube, like it was kind of hard to watch videos on the internet that were any longer than 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So I went from book to book to book. And the cool thing was at that time, almost everything I read was confirmatory. Like all the books that I was finding and reading about healing cancer were saying the same things. They're saying raw foods, juicing, fasting, detoxification, stress reduction, forgiveness. And so, and exercise, just these really core fundamental health principles that are not new, right? None of this is cutting edge. This goes back to Hippocrates, And so that made it easy for me in some ways because now the internet there's a million articles and it's pretty confusing and, you can really get lost and overwhelmed trying to get answers. But I started on the journey and there was a lot of pressure for me to do chemotherapy. And I went to see an oncologist because my family really wanted me to go. And the appointment did not go well. My wife and I went and he was just rude to us and cold and condescending and basically said, if you don't do chemotherapy, you're insane. And then I went to a naturopathic doctor and it was a completely opposite experience. And he was warm and caring and his office was peaceful. And he was the first person to tell me you're doing the right thing. Because he knew about the raw food diet. He had read the first book I had read.
Well, what was your diet when you were diagnosed? Like when you were like 26 years old, I'm assuming it, I think you were married then, right? Like you had.
Yeah, I'd been married 2 years.
What was your diet like then?
It was the standard American diet. It was tons of meat and dairy, tons of processed food, junk food, fast food, very little fruits and vegetables, like, 1 or 2 servings a day on a good day. And I went from that to eating 15 to 20 servings of fruits and vegetables every single day.
What about your stress
Believe
levels?
me. Huh?
What about your stress levels and all that with work?
Yeah, I was, as an entrepreneur, I was in real estate and I was very driven, very ambitious. And I had, in the 2 years leading up to my diagnosis, I had bought 34 properties and renovated them and had, tenants, and I was managing, I was a property manager and a real estate investor and, but I loved what I was doing. Like I didn't hate it. It wasn't like I was in a job where people were mean to me and abusive and things like that, but there was definitely a lot of stress doing what I was doing, but I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. But that was, it was stressful and I wasn't taking care of myself for sure. And I wasn't like drinking or smoking or doing drugs, but, the diet and stress, all of those things add up, right? They all work against you. It got me early for sure. Usually cancer doesn't hit you, until you're sometimes in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. But young adult colon cancer is the fastest growing segment of cancer. In other words, more people are getting colon cancer at younger ages.
Mm.
They just reduced the screening age from 50 to 45. And I think it should be even lower. And our diet is a major driver of colon cancer. Alcohol is a major driver of colon cancer. Processed meat and red meat, major drivers of colon cancer. So, yeah, more and more young people are getting it at early ages. And it is preventable. If you get a colonoscopy and they find a polyp, they can snip it off and it'll never grow to be a tumor.
Mm.
So it is preventable if you catch it early, but they're not screening people till 45. If you have family history, you can maybe get colonoscopy covered earlier by your insurance. You might be able to get one in your 20s, for example. So the naturopathic doctor that I saw, had a great appointment with him. Then he connected me with an integrative oncologist. And this man was just an incredible prince of a man who had come out of retirement to keep practicing because he didn't like being retired. And he had spent his entire career in conventional oncology. And so most of his patients die, right? He did exactly what he was trained to do, and everybody died.
Mm.
And so he decided to expand his practice to integrate non-toxic therapies into his practice, like IV vitamin C and glutathione and mannose and other non-toxic therapies that weren't, standard of care, but they had potential to be helpful and were less likely to be harmful, and almost no risk of harm. And so he was in his 70s and he was doing these things and was traveling to China to research Eastern medicine, like in his 70s. So that he was another just incredible blessing in my life. And so I was it's cobbled this little support system together. And in the beginning, it was basically just my mom, a naturopath, and this oncologist. And everybody else thought I was nuts.
Even like your wife, she had to be a part of that support group, right?
She was not.
Really?
She was not in the beginning because she didn't understand. She didn't know what to do, and she loved me, and wanted me to do chemo because she really thought that was the only way I was going to survive. And but after that appointment with the oncologist that went so badly, it kind of gave her a taste of the reality. And she started to think differently about oncology. And in a short amount of time, she became more supportive. And we're still married. This was almost 18 years ago. So our marriage is great. But that was a very tough time because I was changing very fast. I mean, I changed my life overnight. It's like I almost became a different person.
Yeah.
And she even said to me in a moment of tension, she said, "I don't like the person you're becoming."
Wow. But I mean, it's fear, right? I mean, you talked about, like, there's a great this picture that you paint, right, of the train station, of like your choice of, describe that because I don't want to butcher that. The train station in
Yeah.
the jungle.
Mm-hmm. Well, after that appointment with the oncologist, which, by the way, he talked me into chemo, and I made an appointment to get a port put in like 3 weeks to start chemo, right? That was like the next step. You got to put a port in here so they can just, mainline it. And in that period, I did some really hard praying and soul searching and thinking and reading and juicing. And I was thinking about my life, and it was kind of like this. It's like the analogy I use is like, you got two paths, right? You got the wide paved road that everybody's going down. And, that's the road that takes you to the chemo train, and everybody's cheering you on and making t-shirts and baking cupcakes and cookies for you and bringing you nice little gifts and sending you cards and giving you money. And, just everybody supports you and they're just there for you. And then you get on the chemo train and it's state of the art and the chairs are comfy and they bring you all these little snacks and everybody's just loving on you. And it's just so nice. And then off you go and the suffering starts. And who knows, where it's going to end, right? Are they going to drop you off at the end of the line? Well, healthy, cancer free, or are they going to drop you off and say, we're sorry, we've done all we can do?
Mhm.
You know, go home and die.
Mhm.
So that's pretty scary, right? As much as they try to shine it up and make it appealing, it's still a pretty scary prospect. Then on the other hand, you've basically got the jungle, right? A path into the jungle that's overgrown that you got to hack your way through in the dark. No support. Like, no one supports you. Nobody's cheering you on. Everyone's saying, don't go that way. You're crazy. You're a fool. You're stubborn. And you're alone. And so that was pretty scary too, right? There's no guarantee you're going to get well going that way.
Yeah.
And, you know, the prospect there. So if you do chemo and you die, you're a hero and you're a warrior and you're a fighter and everybody honors you. If you go into the jungle and die, you're a fool.
Hmm.
Right? And nobody's honoring you when you're dead. You're a cautionary tale that people tell.
Yeah.
And I didn't want that for my legacy, but I knew I had to go into the jungle. I knew that's the way I had to
Yes.
go.
I love that. But, I don't want to compare it to anything else because that story is very powerful, but just in life in general with decisions, right? Like even if you're in a position in your life, a pivotal moment where you're just, let's say you can relate this the career, you can relate this relationships, whatever. Like there are people that are, don't do that as an entrepreneur, Trey. Don't do that because that is, that's career suicide or that's dumb. Why would you do that? You got this great thing going on. You need to go pursue this because this is what the status quo is. And in your case, the status quo is chemo. Everybody does it because that's what's pushed on us, right? I would like to think that if I developed cancer, and I've talked to my wife about this. My wife is an RN, and I've already told her there's many cases where people like yourself have used diet and the power of our immune system and body to heal themselves of this. Um, Anita Morgani, who's very famous in the
Yeah.
near death experience, community, had cancer. She was living in Asia, moved to India, tweaked her diet and her lifestyle, and healed herself. But when she put herself back into that Asian culture or society, she developed it again, and that's where her crazy story started again. But going back to your point of the jungle and that amazing, what society for us in the West paint as this road to healing ourselves. I think it's you have to make that decision, and it's hard and it's fear based because it's like these kind of books like you wrote. People are like, yeah, but that's great for him, but what about for me? And I guess my question is this: is there a cancer that if you were diagnosed with, is there a cancer that you would go and get treated for chemo?
It's a great question. Before I answer it, I just want to confirm what you're saying is that this isn't just about cancer, right? This is a message that is really universal in that, if you have a dream or a desire or a passion, right, you've got to listen to your instincts and intuition, right? Because it's your life, it's nobody else's life. And so you're accountable for your life. You can't look back on your life and say, like, well, I wanted to do that, but nobody else thought it was a good idea, so I didn't do it, right? You don't want those kind of regrets. If you have a dream and a vision, you've got to pursue it. And you can't worry about what people think of you, right? And I know that sounds cliche, but you have to just be okay with people not understanding and thinking you're a fool. And the cool thing is like, you know, people generally they're not comfortable when you are independent, right? When you're an entrepreneur, when you're independent, or when you go against the grain, it makes other people uncomfortable. And most of the time they don't understand, or they're not going to support you. So you have to be okay with that. And the cool thing is that in the beginning you have no support. People think you're crazy or stupid or whatever. But if you're successful, then all of a sudden they think you're a genius.
Yeah, right.
So you have that to look forward to, right? Once you prove that you can do something that people don't think you can do, then their attitude about you and their opinion about you changes. And so anyway, keep that in mind as you're pursuing your goals and dreams and vision for your life. But the question is, are there certain cancers that you should do chemo for or whatever? So the thing is, food doesn't cure cancer. Your immune system cures cancer, right? Your body creates cancer and your body can heal it if given the proper nutrients and care, right? So the nutrients are part of it and the care is the other part of it. That's not just the food, but the food's a huge piece of the puzzle for sure.
Mhm.
That's a piece of the physical puzzle. So you're a being, your mind, body, spirit, right? You have mental health, emotional health, spiritual health, and physical health, and they're all intertwined. They're all interconnected. And usually your physical health is a reflection of your mental, emotional, and spiritual health, right? Your body, your physical body is manifesting your spiritual and mental and emotional health. And so you can do all the physical stuff that's supposed to help your physical body and you'll get a benefit. But if you don't address the other stuff, which could account for 70 to 80% of the equation, you're going to miss the boat, right? You're not going to get the results you want. So for me, it was radical life change. So again, I'm not beating around the bush, but I'm just setting up what I'm about to get into here. So there is nothing everything that I did, I'll put it a different way. Everything I did was do no harm, right? Everything I pursued were things that could help me and would not hurt me in any way. Things that had no risk of harm. The radical diet change, supplementation, what the alternative therapies and complementary therapies I did, everything was harmless, right? It had no risk of harm and only had potential benefit. So that was my main criteria for how I decided what I was going to do, right? Will it hurt me? Yes or no? If it won't hurt me and it might help and I can find it and afford it, I'll do it, right? So now, having said that, earlier I said the cancer industry has only reduced the rate of cancer death by 5% in 60 years. There was a study that came out the year I was diagnosed, although I didn't read it till years later, which is called The Contribution of Cytotoxic Chemotherapy to 5-Year Survival in Adult Malignancies. And this study was done in Australia. They looked at about 150,000 Australians and 150,000 Americans. And what they concluded was that chemotherapy, over all the cancers that they investigated, which was, I think it was about 22 cancers. So it's not every cancer, but they looked at 22 cancers and they looked at the 5-year survival and they calculated how much does chemotherapy contribute to 5-year survival, right? How much of an impact is it making? And the average over these 22 cancers was 2.1%. Chemotherapy was adding 2.1% to 5-year survival. For some of those cancers, it was 0, right? And for others, it was 5%. And for others, it was like maybe about 20%. So the cancers that respond best to chemotherapy are typically the blood-based cancers. Childhood leukemia, especially CLL, some adult leukemias and lymphomas, and then testicular cancer. Those cancers, chemotherapy works way better than it does for solid tumor cancers. So brain cancer, breast, liver, lung, colon, ovarian, cervical, those type of cancers, chemo doesn't cure them for the most part, especially when they're advanced stages like stage 3 and 4. And that's where the story gets muddled and messy because there's a lot of different types of cancers, right? There's blood-based, there's solid tumor-based, there's a lot of different types of chemo, and some chemos work better than others. But anyway, just to kind of summarize it, and I expound on this in my book, Chris Beat Cancer, but to summarize it in a way that is, bite-sized. Chemotherapy works better for blood-based cancers, and it doesn't work great for solid tumor cancers. If we're talking about actual cure. So like childhood leukemia, testicular cancer, the survival rate, the 10-year survival rate is about 90% or more. It's pretty good, right? 90% live 10 years or more, right? It's other cancers, not so much. I was told you've got a 60% chance of living 5 years. And 60% is pretty close to 50%. 50%, well, we know that's like a coin toss. So it wasn't very encouraging. And I had all the odds stacked against me, which I learned later. But if you have a tumor on the right side, your survival's worse. If you're a young adult, it's more aggressive. Your survival's worse. If you have more than 2 lymph nodes, you're infected. Your survival's worse. So there was a number. I mean, you check all the boxes I talk about in my book. Like the odds were stacked against me in terms of survival after surgery. Um, I have a free guide on my website. You can find it on every page of chrisbeatcancer.com. It's called 20 Questions for Your Oncologist.
Hmm.
And if you have cancer, or if a loved one has cancer, please go download this guide, go through it, and it'll give you the questions that you absolutely have to ask your doctor. You have to ask these questions. If you don't, you are flying blind. And most patients don't know the right questions to ask. And they just ask stuff like, am I going to miss work? Am I going to lose my hair? You know, you'd be shocked at how many patients don't ask this question, which is, will this treatment cure me?
Hmm.
Right? That's the most important of all the questions. And then from there, there's a bunch that need to be asked. So I created that. That's one of the things I'm most proud of, is that free guide, because it's helped thousands and thousands of people get really clear answers from their doctors, because doctors typically, they don't have time. They can't spend quality time with you. You got 15 or 20 minutes. And then it's time for the next patient. You know, like you can't get anything done. You can't learn anything in 15 or 20 minutes. I mean, most of it's just talking about treatment, and you just barely even know what's happening.
Sure.
So doctors are trapped in a system that pays them really well despite the results. And it's not the doctor's fault. They're trained with a very limited toolkit, and they're not trained in nutrition and diet and lifestyle therapies. They're not trained in prevention. They don't know what foods are actually anti-cancer foods and what foods promote cancer. They don't give their patients good advice or any advice in terms of diet and lifestyle, except they typically say, eat as much as you can. Eat whatever you want and make sure you eat a lot of calories. And they will send them home with a recommended list of foods to eat, including ice cream and milkshakes for the calories, because they don't want you to lose too much weight, because you're going to lose your appetite when you do chemo, because it makes you sick. So they want you to drink milkshakes. You know, it's horrible advice. And so it's a really messed up system. And I have great empathy for doctors, because they spend over a decade of their life studying and training to become a doctor. And then they're thrust into this system that's just like a meat grinder, and they have no medical freedom at all. And the treatments that they're taught to use don't work. They don't save people for the most part. And so now they're just stuck in this system that pays them well, but you know, there's so much pain and suffering. And this is why doctors have one of the highest rates of suicide of any profession. Because it's so difficult, right? It's not the physical work, it's the mental and emotional toll that it takes, right? The despair that doctors face. You know, I've devoted my whole life to this profession, and I'm miserable, right? I'm miserable. I'm not making a difference. I'm just a pill pusher, right? All I'm doing is just writing scripts all day for people. Like, no one is getting any meaningful benefit or change in their life. I thought that's what being a doctor was about. Those are the kind of things you hear from doctors that are burned out. And I've interviewed, there's a medical doctor I interviewed years ago named Pamela Weibel, and she tracks every physician suicide. This is her mission. Is she has a wall in her house that has a picture of every doctor that's committed suicide in, I don't know, the last 5 or 10 years. It's wild. And her mission is to help prevent doctor suicide and med student suicide. That's what she does now. It's such a big problem. But yeah, if you want to go down the rabbit hole, you can watch my interview with Dr. Pamela Weibel. It's on chrisbeatcancer.com. You can just search for Pamela in the search bar. But anyway, so we're rabbit trailing, but the point is,
well, here's this, right? Here's what I want to ask you. Like, you're a man of faith, right?
Yeah.
How did that test your faith?
Oh man. I mean, look, I'm a Christian. I'm a believer. I believe that there is a God who loves us and created us. And, you know, I was serving in my church. I was playing on Sunday mornings in the worship team. I'm a musician, you know, like I was really trying to be a good person, you know, and And so, yeah, it was a huge test of my faith. Like, I'm like, why am I the guy with cancer? Like, why isn't the child molester getting cancer right now? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure there's a healthy child molester out there somewhere. Right. Why do I have cancer? So, yeah, I definitely struggled with those thoughts. And, but one of the first things that came to mind, a verse out of Romans 8:28 says, we know that God works all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so I was like, okay, well, here we go. This is a test of my faith. Am I going to believe this? Right? Because all faith is choosing to believe. That's what faith is. It's belief. You choose to believe or you don't. And so I was like, all right, if this is true, if I believe this is true, if I believe that the Bible is true and that this is a promise, then I'm going to believe that God's going to work this for my good. I don't know how, I don't like it, but I'm going to believe it. So that was encouraging to me. And that was the very first, sort of shot in the arm in terms of faith. And then from there, I saw all these little mini miracles, right, happening on my journey that just kept reminding me I was on the path. And that's the beautiful thing when you kind of follow everybody's advice and you go with the flow and you do what you're told and you're right. And you're in the masses. It's kind of like, you don't need miracles, necessarily. But that path is often the path that leads to destruction, right? And so when you step out in faith into the jungle alone, right? You're stepping out into the unknown. You need help, right? You're hypersensitized to the fact that you don't know what you're doing. You're in uncharted territory and you need help. You need guidance. You need, it's like, I love this example, which is, if you've ever been hiking, right? Mm-hmm. There's always a point on a hike where you think to yourself, am I lost? Right?
Yeah.
Right? You're like, I hope I'm not lost. Am I lost? But you're on a trail. And so you kind of just keep going. And then you see a sign or a marker and you're like, okay, good. All right, cool. Yeah, this is the way. We just keep going this way. Right. And so that's how, the cancer journey was for me. Right. There was definitely days where I was like, oh gosh, I hope I'm doing the right thing. I hope not getting worse. I hope I don't die. Right. I don't want to die a fool. And then there would be something that would be a reminder, something or someone would come into my life, some piece of information or whatever, and that would just be like, that would just remind me you're on the right path. Keep going. So yeah, it forced me to really get deep in my faith and really depend on God in a way that I never had before. Wow. And because, when life's easy, it's like, you don't need faith, right? You don't need God. You don't need help. Most of us, like, life is easy. We have food, we have clothing, we have shelter. We're not being shot at, we're not fleeing from terrorists, right? It's like we're spoiled in our countries in so many ways. We don't have desperation like so many people living in difficult circumstances do. And so when you're finally faced with something that's life-threatening and difficult, then it forces you to kind of step out of your normal, operating system and be like, okay, I need help. This is out of my control. I need supernatural guidance and intervention and direction. So that was a huge, huge part for me. I mean, I'm just so thankful. And St. Augustine said, work as if everything depends on you. Well, pray as if everything depends on God, and work as if everything depends on you. Right. So it's a two-way street. You don't just sit there and do nothing and be like, God's going to heal me. Right. It's like, no, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to take action. Faith without works is dead.
Yeah.
Works is action. Right.
That.
If you believe, faith is belief. If you believe you can accomplish something, take some action. Mm-hmm. Right. Because your belief is worthless if you don't do anything.
Yeah.
So, and that's straight out of James. So I took massive action to change my life. Massive action. I just decided I'm going to change everything about my life. And there's things that you can change right away, and you get a benefit pretty quickly. Like if you radically change your diet, you'll start to feel differently within a week or two, right? You start exercising, you start to feel differently really quickly within a week or two, right? Like those are things that anyone can start doing immediately. And then there's other changes that you need to make that take time and discovery, right? And the mental, emotional, and spiritual changes, right? Your thoughts, your beliefs, the way you act and react in the world, the way you think about yourself, the way you think about and judge others, right? And in that takes time. But I just had some wonderful guidance in from the books that I read, and so I decided, look, I don't want to leave any stone unturned. Like I'll change everything. I
Mhm.
want to live. And I got really clear about that. And I talk about this sort of concept called the Beat Cancer mindset in two of my books, which are these two, Chris
Mhm.
Beat Cancer and Beat Cancer Daily. And the Beat Cancer mindset is like this. First thing is you have to want to get well, right? And some people don't. Some people do not want to get well. Some people do not want to live, and they secretly have a death wish. And that may sound crazy, but it's true. I can just tell you, 18 years, talked to a lot of cancer patients. It's true.
Mhm.
And it's okay. If someone doesn't want to live, I'm okay with that. I don't have any problem, no judgment. But if you want to live, A, B, you have to believe you can get well. So if you want to live and you believe you can get well, then the next step is you have to take action. You have to be willing to take massive action to change your life, right? You have to be willing to change, to take responsibility for your life and your health. Everything in life happens for a reason. And most of the time, the reason is you. And if you're willing to admit that, then you've empowered yourself, right? You're no longer a victim, right? Things don't just happen to you because of bad luck, right? Things that happen to you aren't always somebody else's fault, right? And the more responsibility you can take, the more empowered you become. And then part of that, the next step in that process is, okay, figuring out what you can change and then actually doing it, right? And then being disciplined and consistent in those changes, because you only have one day at a time, right? You've got 16 hours roughly of waking time in one day to work and take care of yourself, right? And so you can't, ruminate on the past. It's gone, can't fix it. You can't worry about the future, right? All you can do is today. And so I realized I needed to optimize my day and eat the most potent anti-cancer foods every day, just flood my body with nutrition, exercise, and reduce my stress, reorganize my life, and then start working on the internal stuff, and so I realized I was very critical and judgmental. I was a very competitive person. I wasn't happy for anybody else's success. I was envious and critical, right? And resentful, right? Jealous of people who I perceived were more successful or had advantages or privileges that I didn't have, right?
Mhm.
That's not healthy. Those are toxic thoughts and toxic emotions. Um, I never had a problem. I wasn't a worrier until I got cancer, right? And so now I'm struggling with fear and worry and uncertainty and doubt about my future. So I had to quickly resolve that because, and I say quickly, it wasn't a quick resolution, but I had to identify the fact that I was doing it. I had to recognize that I was doing this now, and I had to give my fear to God. So every time the fear would creep in, I would just say, God, okay, I'm not going to be afraid. I am feeling afraid, and I'm just trusting you, and I'm giving you my fear, right? I'm not going to be afraid. I'm not going to let fear paralyze me. I'm not going to let it steal my joy. And so this is what I didn't know the term back then, but they call it mindfulness, right? Being mindful of your thoughts, catching yourself thinking and analyzing what you're thinking and choosing to think differently if you make a judgment that you're not thinking the way you want to be.
Mhm.
So when I would be critical of others, I would have a snap critical thought. I'd be like, wait a second, I'm being critical. I'm not going to do that. You know, right? I'm feeling jealous. I'm not going to be jealous of this person. And the way that you can, uh, my secret hack is, cancer is sort of cuts this dividing line in your life where you realize everything you cared about, you kind of stop caring about when you have cancer, right? You got BC, before cancer, AD, after the diagnosis. And it's like before, there's this old expression, like the healthy person cares about everything, and the sick person only cares about one thing.
Hmm.
And so, you know, my priorities got shifted pretty quick, right? I cared about getting well and my wife and, keeping my bills paid and, affording healthy food and treatments and supplements, right? Like, that was it. That's like all I cared about. I didn't care about anything else. And so in that process, in the most difficult season of my life, I learned how to practice gratitude. I learned to be content and happy when I had every reason to be angry and bitter and pissed off, right, at the world and at my life and my circumstance. I had every reason. Like, what are you going to say to me? I have cancer, right? Like, I can be an a-hole if I want to, but I realize, like, I don't want to live that way. I can't live that way. That can't be good.
Yeah.
Right? So I would catch myself in those moments and I would start practicing gratitude and say, okay, wait a second. What do I have to be thankful for? I can see and hear, I can get out of bed, right? I can feed myself. I have a home. I have enough money to pay my next set of bills. I have a wife who loves me. I have parents who love me. I'm able to work, right? And on and on and on, right? I could just keep adding up and piling up, counting my blessings. And as soon as you do that, if you just get in the habit of doing that, it will extinguish these feelings of jealousy and resentment and unhappiness and all those emotions that are stressful that manifest when you focus on people who have more than you. So you always have a choice of where to put your focus. You can focus on people who have more than you, and that makes you feel discontent and unhappy and shortchanged, right? Right. Or you can focus on people who have less than you, and then you realize how good your life is and how much you have to be thankful for. So my gratitude hack is this: anytime I start to get frustrated or, unhappy, or my feelings get hurt or whatever, I just stop right in the moment and say, you know what? Right now, there's somebody dying in the hospital who would give anything to trade places with you.
Hmm.
They would love to have your problems.
Hmm.
And I'm like, yep, okay. That's all I needed to remind myself of. Life is great, right? Life is so good. Like, I'm not going to let this steal my joy. This person in traffic who gave me the bird or whatever, So, or worse. I mean, I've been on the internet for 11 years as a survivor and a patient advocate. I mean, every possible thing you could ever imagine that someone could say to me has been said, right? People are mean to me on the internet, right? There are people that don't like my message and they're mean,
Yeah.
right? And so I just learned to be very quick to forgive. I don't take it personally. I just forgive people quickly and I let it go. And so that's the other big thing that I had to do was I just made a decision to forgive every person who had ever hurt me in life, every single one, because the more I learned and the more I started learning about health, holistic health, the more clear it became to me that, as I said earlier, your mental, emotional, and spiritual health affect your physical health. And the way that works is when you're stressed, when you're in a state of distress, and distress is caused by fear, worry, and anxiety. That's future based. It's caused by jealousy and envy and resentment, right? That's present based. And then it's caused by bitterness and anger and resentment and unforgiveness, guilt and shame. That's based in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of us are bouncing back and forth between stuff we're angry from the past, stuff we're worried about in the future, people we're envious of in the present. And so we're just constantly in a state of stress. And just the first step is recognizing that you're doing it, right? And, right? Recognizing these are bad thought habits that you have to break. And so I already talked about what I did. I gave my fears and worries to God and I practiced gratitude, right, in the present. And then dealing with my past, I realized that the only way out of bitterness and resentment is forgiveness. That's the way. That is the way you release yourself from a prison of pain. Because people hurt you, they cause you pain. But when you hold on to that hurt, you're holding on to the pain, and you continue to suffer, and it's unnecessary. And when you're in any of those states, present, past, or future distress, those states are suppressing your immune system. They're putting you in a state of fight or flight, which is sympathetic nervous system dominance. And when you're in fight or flight, guess what happens? Your immune system is impaired. Stress suppresses your immune system, and it promotes inflammation. If you have chronic inflammation and chronic disease, it's probably stress, right? And stress also drives us to self-medicate. So you studied psychology. I think you probably have a pretty good handle on this more than the average person. But when you're in a state of distress, you're going to find a way to alleviate that stress. And we self-medicate through food, alcohol, tobacco, drugs, legal or illegal, through pornography, through gambling, through being a shopaholic, through binge media consumption, through gaming, right? Like, these are all ways that we distract our conscious mind from our problems. But and that's effective in a small way. But the bigger problem is your subconscious mind knows about your problems all the time, right? Yeah. So like, your conscious mind can be distracted. That's whatever's on the computer screen. That's your conscious mind. But your subconscious is all the information running behind whatever the window that's open right now. And so this is why people have panic attacks, right? Because they have all these unresolved problems, right? Running in their subconscious, right? That are unresolved, and it just builds up and it becomes too much, right? And there's a pressure relief valve, panic attack, or explosive anger, or just bursting into sobbing fits, and so these are very common things. And so I just realized, okay, I got to forgive everybody. I'm gonna people have hurt me. I've held on to resentments, and I'm letting it go. It's not worth dying over. And so I just did this really simple thing, which is the prayer of forgiveness. And it goes like this. By the way, you can't just forgive everybody in like one moment, right? You can't be like, okay, I forgive everybody, I'm good. Like, that doesn't work. You have to think through your life. You have to think about the people who've hurt you, right? You got to go and open the filing cabinet in your mind where the painful memories are, and you got to pull them out and relive them, so to speak. Revisit them. And so in doing that, so for example, I could think, okay, when I was, I don't know, maybe in first or second grade, a kid picked on me on the playground, right? So this is one example. It's like a kid was mean to me on the playground. And so I'm remembering it, and I just say, God, you know what? You know what they did? You know how they feel about it. You know how I feel about it. But I'm choosing to forgive them, right? They hurt me, but I'm choosing to forgive them, and I'm letting it go. I'm giving it to you. It's all yours.
All yours.
It's all yours, right? I'm not going to carry it anymore. And forgive me for holding on to this resentment for so long. And I'm asking you to bless them. I'm asking you to bless the person who hurt me. I'd rather you didn't, right? But I'm asking anyway, right? Because I know it's the right thing to do. Jesus said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So it's like, I'm just going to try to be like Jesus here and just say, bless this person who hurt me. And then forgiveness is like a healthy diet, right? It only works if you stick with it.
Yeah.
So I've made the decision to forgive. If that feeling or resentment starts to creep in next week or next month, I just catch it right in the moment and say, you know what? No, I forgave them, right? I'm not going to let this resentment back in. Like, I'm not going to let it back into my heart. And, when people hurt you, they hurt your heart, right? This is like a cliche, right? Broken heart. And, if your heart has been beat up and battered and bruised by people over many years, you're going to have a sick heart, right? A hardened heart and a sick heart. And a sick heart will produce a sick body.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing is that forgiveness heals your heart. It frees you. It releases the burden. Like, that expression, like, oh, that person, they got a lot of baggage, right? Well, what is baggage? That's you. Imagine, you carrying bags full of bricks, right? And every brick is some wrong that someone did to you, right? And it's weighing you down.
Yeah.
And guess what? You can put the bags down. And that's what forgiveness is, right? It's you putting down the bag, right? I'm leaving the baggage behind. I'm not carrying it into the future. So this is the forgiveness is so powerful. I cannot emphasize it enough. And, I've got a brand new cookbook. It's called Beat Cancer Kitchen. And it's all about, it's whole food, plant-based recipes. And there's an anti-cancer diet section in there, and then a section for recipes for prevention. And it just came out 2 weeks ago, and we're super excited about it because my audience has been asking for it for like a decade. So here it is up close. And this is the giant salad that I ate every single day, twice a day, to overdose on nutrition. Like, those things are very important, but I just want to make sure that your audience understands, like, holistic health means body, mind, spirit, right? Mental, emotional, and physical health. And so you can't just eat a healthy diet. If you eat a healthy diet and you don't forgive people who hurt you, you may not get well.
Sure.
You probably won't. Like, anger is so toxic and so poisonous and destructive. Sure. And so I just learned, I decided I'm going to forgive everyone. And I worked through that, and every painful memory that I could think of over, many different just sessions of sitting quietly and working on it. I just did it, right? I got through it all. And then when people hurt me now, I'm just quick to forgive them, and I don't let it become a burden to me.
Sure.
So
Chris, man, this has been amazing, dude. I'm going to have you back on. I can't believe we've been on here an hour.
Oh, I can talk for hours, my friend. I've learned a lot in 18 years. I'm telling you.
Well, you have to come back on, because we got to talk about some more of this stuff, but I can't thank you enough for joining the show, my man.
Thank you. Hey, man, it's been fun. Thanks for having me. I just appreciate being able to share what I've learned with your audience, and hopefully give them hope and inspiration and resources. Like, the thing is, like, you can get well, your body can heal, you can change your life. You have the power to do these things. And most everything that I've done and that I've talked about costs you nothing, right? If you're just willing to change, there are resources available to you and options available to you to improve your life. And so that's kind of my big, that's my big message. That's why I do what I do, is just to help people understand I'm not special, right? I don't have superpowers. I'm just a regular dude who had his back up against the wall, and I listened to my instincts and intuition and stepped out in faith and decided to change my life. And I got well, and here I am. So